The phrase that Jesus often used to refer to himself was Son of Man. Most serious students of the Bible understand that Jesus was not using this phrase as a statement of humility, emphasizing his humanity as casual readers of the Bible often assume. It's just the opposite. By this phrase, Jesus was affirming his identity as Messiah. The term Son of Man is a reference to Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, where Daniel says, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a Son of Man was coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. There is no doubt about whom Daniel was describing. You may recall that when Jesus was on trial before the Sanhedrin, he refused to answer the accusations against him about what he said or did. The only question that Jesus answered was the question of his identity, who he is. And in his answer, Jesus quoted this prophecy from Daniel, reading from Mark chapter 14. Again the high priest was questioning him, saying to him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus said, I am. And you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, coming with the clouds of heaven. Tearing his clothes, the high priest said, What further need do we have of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. How does it seem to you? And they all condemned him to be deserving of death. Indeed, every time that Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man, the religious elite were enraged because they understood exactly what he meant. But one bump in the road that I encounter with this phrase, Son of Man, is that in the next chapter of Daniel, the angel Gabriel addresses Daniel as the Son of Man. As 93 times, God also addresses the prophet Ezekiel himself as Son of Man. And the title is hardly meant to be a compliment. In a dozen other passages in the Old Testament, we find the phrase Son of Man generically referring to all humanity, as in Psalm 8, verse 4. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Of course, readers of the English translation of the Bible can easily tell by context who is meant by the phrase Son of Man, whether it is the Messiah, or a prophet, or all humanity. But readers of the Hebrew Bible see the distinction even more clearly. The Hebrew text offers us two different sets of words, one referring to Messiah, and the other for everyone else. So let's take a look and find some gold hiding in plain sight. Let's start with Daniel chapter 8 and see how Gabriel addresses the prophet Daniel as Son of Man. We go to BibleHub.com/interlinear, click on Hebrew Interlinear Chapters, select the book of Daniel, and chapter 8. And now scroll down to verse 17. And the part of the verse we want to look at is right here. Remember that the Hebrew text reads from right to left, so following the interlinear translation offered for us here. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision refers to the end of time. And the phrase we want to focus on right here is Ben Adam, Son of Man. First word is Ben, and let's click on the concordance ID number. And the Hebrew word ben is a noun. It means son, a descendant, a child, and really has no more nuance than that. On the right side, we scroll down the abbreviated concordance list to where it says how many times it's used. Yes, we find this word ben in the Old Testament used as a standalone word almost 5,000 times. Ben is also a prefix for a few Old Testament names like Benjamin, or Benjamin as we pronounce it, which means son of the right hand, or Ben-Hadad, otherwise known as Ben-Hadad, son of Hadad. And the last half of this phrase, Ben-Adam, is more interesting. If you think you recognize the name Adam, you are quite correct. Let's take a look at that in the lexicon. Adam is a noun that means man, mankind, human, and it is also the proper name for the man that God created out of the dust of the earth, Adam. The word is derived from Adom, meaning to be red or ruddy, possibly referring to the reddish color of human skin or earth. Now, if we were to right-click on this arrow right here, we would find several words that follow this one in the lexicon that are all related to Adam. And here's a summary of those words. First, we have Adam, the noun that means man, mankind, human, or Adam. And then next we see Adom, the adjective meaning red. I want you to notice the identical spelling in the Hebrew text. The only difference are those little dots and lines above and below the letters. They're called the vowel pointings. They indicate the vowel sounds that we're to voice with this word. The text of the Hebrew language is consonantal, and the vowel points were invented for the Masoretic text some 600 or 700 years after the New Testament era. So on the page, they really look like identical words, though they're pronounced differently in different contexts. The next word is Adom. We pronounce it Edom in our English Bibles. This is Esau's nickname for his red complexion. We read about in Genesis chapter 25. The next word is Odem. Again, it's spelled on the consonantal text identically as Adam, and it means any red gemstone, usually refers to a ruby. And the last one in the list I find most interesting. It's Adamah, and it is a noun that means ground, the land, the earth, the soil. We find this word used 5 times in Genesis chapter 2, and 3 more times in Genesis 3. And here with Adamah, we find the connection between Adam's name and the earth, the soil, the dust from which he was created, and to which we all return. So we can see that when God addresses Daniel as Ben Adam, there are multiple nuances built into that phrase. Son of man, son of Adam, son of earth. Students of the works of C.S. Lewis will recognize that Lewis utilized those titles in his Chronicles of Narnia. Well, let's take a look and see if God uses that same phrase when addressing the prophet Ezekiel as son of man. So for that, we go to Ezekiel. And right off the bat in chapter 2, the first verse. And he said to me, Ben Adam, son of man. There it is, and many more times in God's message to Ezekiel. And elsewhere in the Old Testament, the phrase Ben Adam is used generically of the human race, as we saw in Psalm 8. Now, what about Messiah's title as Son of Man in Daniel chapter 7? And we scroll down to verse 13. And Daniel writes, "In the night vision I was watching, and behold, with clouds of heaven, Kabar Anash, one like a son of man." That first letter, the kaf, is a prefix meaning like or as. The part of that word we're interested in here is bar. And let's look at that. And bar is a noun, and it means son or grandson. And if we scroll down here to the bottom, we find some important information that the word bar is not Hebrew, but is Aramaic. And why is that? Well, where was Daniel when he wrote this? In Babylon, serving the court of King Nebuchadnezzar, where the language of the region was Aramaic. In the book of Daniel, beginning in chapter 2 to the end of chapter 7, was all written in the Aramaic language, the official language of the royal court of Babylon. When we look over into the New Testament, we find several Greek transliterations of Aramaic words and phrases, including this word bar as a prefix of several names, such as Barnabas, the son of encouragement, Simon Bar-Jonah, Barabbas, and others. I have a note below in the description of this video which has more information about the use of the Aramaic language in both the Old and New Testament. So, if this word for son, bar, is Aramaic, we might expect this word Enosh, translated as man, also is Aramaic in origin. So let's look. Enosh is a noun, and it means man, human, or mortal. And scrolling down, we see that yes, indeed, this is the Aramaic word for man. While in everyday usage, Anash was the Aramaic equivalent of the Hebrew word Adam, the linguistic origins of the two words are different. Missing from Anash are the nuances of son of Adam and son of earth. The origins of Anash imply human mortality. How ironic, or should I say how oxymoronic, that this title, which focuses on mortality, should be ascribed to one who is eternal and immortal. But that's the gospel, isn't it? Isaiah 53, Philippians chapter 2, Hebrews 9 and 10 all emphasize that Christ, who is immortal, experienced death for us in order that we might experience immortality with him. Now, moving over to the New Testament, when Jesus repeatedly refers to himself as the Son of Man, what language was he speaking? The evidence is very strong that he and his Jewish contemporaries spoke to one another in Aramaic, except when they quoted the Old Testament scriptures, in which case they would have quoted the text as it was written in Hebrew. And so, referring to himself as the Son of Man, if Jesus had identified himself with the Hebrew phrase Ben Adam, there would have been no controversy. But if he said those words in the language of that day, in Aramaic, there was only one place in the Old Testament where that exact phrase can be found, namely in Daniel chapter 7. And every Jewish child who had been tutored in the Torah and the Tanakh, the law and the prophets, knew that, and thus everyone who heard Jesus call himself Bar Anash understood that he was identifying himself as the promised Messiah.